Well, I'm going to hell.
Child murderer! Child murderer!
I never played Spyro back in the day. After experiencing the nuance and fluidity of Super Mario 64, I ended up largely ignoring PS1 platformers. It turns out I missed out on a series I think I would have loved. Between the fluid movement, the simple but involved combat, and the platforming that still provides a challenge today, I have become a fan. But when the remastered trilogy was originally released, it skipped the Switch in favor of more powerful consoles. And in the time between launches, the publisher Activision released a similar retro remaster, Crash Team Racing, and included microtransactions rather than building the game to be a complete experience. So between the Switch not being considered when the tech for the game was first developed, and Activision lately being shady in virtually everything that they do, there was plenty of reason to doubt the quality of Spyro Reignited would be released in. So how did the game come out? Let's dive in and see. The docked performance of Spyro on Switch is the epitome of serviceable. It's noticeably blurrier than the Xbox or PlayStation versions, but not in a way that is too detrimental. This is another game where the bright and cartoonish graphics translate fairly well to the hybrid console. The issue is that the Switch clearly wasn't the target system when Spyro was initially developed. It's full of graphical embellishments to make PS4 owners go ooh when they see photos. Almost like they didn't think the games themselves were enough to sell well. They were. The frame rate is acceptable but slightly less stable than other versions. Ironically, this actually benefits the Switch, as every other version suffers from an odd frame stuttering issue. It's hard to consciously notice, but tends to make the experience feel subtly jerky, and can cause motion sickness in some people I know. Because of the general performance on the Switch, it's impossible to tell if the frame pacing is still present. Handheld is where the game shines. The size of the screen highlights all of Spyro's strengths. It's colorful, vibrant, and what minor performance problems you might have are hard to pick out through the action. The biggest visual issue I see with this game is a general smudginess throughout. From Spyro's scales to the blades of grass in an open field, handheld mode is sharp enough to generally feel a step above playing docked. There's no drawbacks to playing on the Switch's screen. Everything is as easy to understand in your hands as it is on the TV. Maybe even easier. One trait of remaking older games that services this is how low resolutions of old TVs meant that game info had to be concise and large enough to read on a 19-inch screen from across the room. This means you don't have to contend with walls of information dumped on you, most of which is superfluous, and doesn't actually aid you in playing the game better in many circumstances. Sorry, went on a little tangent there. Back to the matter at hand. Because of everything discussed up to this point, I'd say that handheld play is definitely the strongest aspect of Spyro Trilogy for Switch. The Reignited Trilogy is eternally on the cusp of perfect. The game is gorgeous, but the Sony and Microsoft ports have frame pacing problems, and there's more drops in frame rate on Switch. Neither of these are egregious problems in my personal experience, but they could impact you specifically depending on your tastes. Another aspect of the relative feel of Spyro is that the game controls noticeably differently on Switch than Xbox or PS4. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what the distinction is, but it felt to me as though the controls were quicker to respond on Switch than the other systems. This may be related to the frame pacing, or it may just be perception since I had recently played Spyro on Switch extensively and hadn't touched the Xbox version in over 6 months. Either way, both control fine and I quickly reacclimated to the Xbox version. So it shouldn't really make a big difference no matter what version you buy, just one of those weird quirks that should be mentioned. And speaking of, even though it doesn't really impact anything, I want to mention that the loading screens that let you sway Spyro around in mid-flight have pretty major frame rate problems. Obviously, bad frame rate in a loading screen isn't anything that affects my final verdict, but there you go. This is a solid port of a great set of games. Make no mistake that this is a remastering made with love, attention, and care by developer Toys for Bob. Having said that, this is a recommendation with more caveats than usual. Ultimately, if you are someone who never uses handheld mode on your Switch, it's hard to justify this version of the game over a dedicated TV console. You don't lose a whole lot, but there's not a lot gained either. However, if you play even a tiny bit of this game away from a television, this is the version to get. I admittedly tend to play my Switch docked 90% of the time, but I enjoyed the handheld experience so much I found myself making excuses to carry it around with me just so I could enjoy the game more on the go. If you would rather super glue your Switch into the dock than take it anywhere with you, go for a dedicated console port. Otherwise, Spyro Reignited on Nintendo Switch will do you well. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this video helped you out in some way. If so, liking and sharing the video is a great way to show your appreciation, as is subscribing, obviously. Funding for this project has come almost exclusively from backers at Patreon, so if you want to directly support how many games we can cover and have a little sway on what videos get made first, check out the page and become a patron. Just $1 is supremely helpful. I also want to shout out backers Jint, Ruatine, as well as Sour Power. Their support to the Patreon and the community in general is incalculable. And this video exists in no small part because of them and many, many others. Thanks again, and I'll see you for the next dive.